Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased indeed to have been invited to address this session of the MacGill School, a very respected summer school, and 36 years now in existence. I've been listening and reading about what has been happening here over a long number of years, and it's great to actually to be here and to be in a position to address you. I'm representing, obviously, Commissioner O'Sullivan here today as the Assistant Commissioner with responsibility for the security of the state, and also, obviously, in my policing functions, which includes international liaison, including in liaison with both Europol and with Interpol. I'm delighted to be able to share a stage, particularly with the Director of Europol, Rob Wainwright, who I have worked with very closely over a long number of years now, and who I am pleased to be able to call or to consider a personal friend, Rob. So the event gives me an opportunity, obviously, to publicly acknowledge the continuing excellent level of cooperation that exists between Garda Síochána and Europol. I am honoured indeed to have I continue to represent, but since 2011 I have been representing Ireland in the Europol Management Board as the representative there, and indeed I was chairman of that board for the 18 months in 2013 and 2014. I can't emphasise enough the vital role that Europol does play in terms of police cooperation in the area of serious crime and indeed also terrorism. This cooperation in policing exists, of course, in tandem with the excellent liaison that we have amongst all of our security services throughout Europe and indeed beyond Europe as well. I'm also delighted to have listened to Dr. Paul Gill, who I hadn't met before, and the presence of Dr. Gill actually in listening to his presentation there, it gives me the opportunity to highlight what I consider, and indeed is what considered within crime and security, an essential ingredient of counter-terrorism strategies in the future. And I am convinced that there has to be further and deeper collaboration between police and academia, and that will be necessary to ensure a better understanding of the various dimensions and the dynamic nature of the threats that exist today. I'm also pleased to share the stage with Declan Power. Declan is a very respected security analyst, and I read him with interest and listen to him on the radio on a regular basis with interest, because a lot of what he says is very much on the button. And Declan, of course, was a former Irish Army officer, and we work very, very closely with the Army in the area of policing and terrorism, and that is the way it should be. I hope that the discussions and the deliberations on the topic will be interesting and productive today. I believe that this provides an invaluable opportunity for specialists to exchange information and identify emerging trends. The sharing of the knowledge, experiences and different perspectives, that can only serve to make us more informed and better equipped to meet the challenges for the future. In the address today, I'm going to concentrate on a few areas, a few key areas that I see. Firstly, I want to set out an overview of what we see as the security threat environment from an Irish perspective, dealing specifically with the threat from terrorism, obviously from outside. Secondly, I will deal with specific concerns that we have arising from the threats posed, and then I will talk about some of the key challenges for the future, and finish with some concluding remarks. And I know that there will be questions afterwards, and hopefully I'll be in a position to answer most of them. The first point I think that I need to emphasise is that Ireland continues to be a very safe place to live in and to do business in. In the recent dreadful attacks in Nice and previously in Brussels and Paris and elsewhere, they have brought into sharp focus the complex, dynamic and evolving threats we face from international terrorism, and especially Islamic extremist terrorism. Garda Síochána has responsibility for both policing and also national security, and in that regard we are almost unique in the world. In the context, we have well-established and trusting relationships with policing and security agencies throughout Europe and beyond. The Garda Síochána has developed considerable experience over the past 4 decades in effectively countering the threats posed by domestic terrorism in this island. And I don't think we can forget that. Okay, the threat is not exactly the same, but as I will talk about later, a lot of what we've been dealing with over the last 40 years as an organisation is, the experience that we've gained there is beneficial in what we're dealing with today. That dual mandate, in my opinion, has been particularly beneficial in the context of cohesive framework for collecting, for analysing and for disseminating information and intelligence. It is the case that over the past 2 decades, and especially since the terrorist attacks in New York in 2001, we have had to pay particular attention to the threat to Europe and potentially to Ireland from Islamic extremist terrorism. Especially in the past number of years, the emergence of the terrorist organisation known as ISIL has significantly highlighted the realities of the threats posed. It's not today or yesterday or the last few years since these attacks became very much in the public that we've been struggling and with what to do with these, along with our international partners. And indeed, it was back as far as 2000 in Harcourt Square. These were issues that were being considered, and I suppose the genesis really of what our community policing base and how we deal with minority communities, not just the Muslim community but across the board, and that is standing to us today. ISIL and the individuals supporting its ideology pose the greatest threat to Europe today. Evidence from the recent attacks clearly demonstrate that there are persons resident in Europe who share the violent extremism ideology of organisations like ISIL and who pose a threat as a consequence. And that is very, very evident from last week. We continue to be in ongoing discussions with our French colleagues concerning the motivation, the planning and execution of the dreadful attack in Nice last weekend. What is particularly challenging for police and security services is the identification of lone actors who may have self-radicalised and pose a threat, but who are not physically interacting with like-minded persons. The protection of soft targets from attacks by a variety of means is also a significant challenge. Some of the recent attacks in Europe have demonstrated how individuals resident in Europe for a long number of years can be radicalised and act independently with little or no direct contact with directing organisations such as ISIL or Al-Qaeda. While my comments here today are almost exclusively directed to the threat posed by international terrorism, I think it would be remiss of me not to take this opportunity to mention that historically domestic terrorism has been the principal threat to the stability of the Irish state and safety of Irish citizens. There remains a potent residual threat from dissident Republican elements, which requires significant resources and ongoing attention from An Garda Síochána in cooperation with our partners in the PSNI, the British Security Services and the Irish Defence Forces. There isn't a day goes by that we are dealing with some issue around a threat to security services, whether that be prison officers, whether it be Army or whether it be Garda Síochána, Police Service of Northern Ireland. And we're in constant contact, and that continues. And I think it's important that we don't forget that when we are talking about the terrorist threat. I should also mention briefly the significant challenges that we face from the activities of serious and organised crime gangs. While most groups are domestically orientated, there are a number that have a significant international dimension and require targeting in cooperation with international partners, including Europol. While drug trafficking remains the key driver of groups active in Ireland, we also see activity in associated criminal markets or multi-commodity trafficking, such as robbery, intimidation, extortion, money laundering, smuggling of firearms and cigarettes. From time to time, we see some evidence of interaction between organised crime groups and terrorist groups. This interaction can vary from confrontational to cooperative. As I referred to earlier, the recent dreadful attacks in Nice, in Brussels and Paris, together with several other outrages elsewhere directed against Western targets, have brought into sharp focus the continuing serious and dynamic nature of the threat posed from international terrorism. The phenomenon of individuals travelling from all over Europe to conflict zones is a significant issue of concern to the majority of European governments and others internationally. The majority of the current threats to European states and interests are linked to the conflict in Iraq and Syria. While a number of motivations influence individuals to travel to conflict zones, including humanitarian and idealistic, the major security concerns relate to the radicalisation influences they are exposed to and the security risks some individuals may pose on returning to their home countries. Persons who have travelled to conflict zones have most likely been exposed to extreme violence and received combat training, and these are possibly radicalised and potentially tasked for action on their return. There is also the potential threat from self-radicalised individuals who may have had no contact with others and received their radicalising influences from online propaganda. The threat to Ireland from Islamic extremism terrorism is currently assessed to be moderate. Let me explain exactly what that means. The threat assessment is described by reference to a series of threats, first of all, threat levels in ascending order: low, moderate, substantial, severe and critical. Moderate is at the lower end of the threat scale and means that an attack is possible but not likely. In other words, Ireland enjoys a relatively benign security environment with no specific intelligence of a particular threat, but there is certainly a potential threat may exist. A much more acute threat obviously exists to many of our European partners. The current threat to our nearest neighbours, the United Kingdom, is assessed as severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. While Unguarded Síochána does not assess the threat to the Irish state to be compatible to that which exists in jurisdictions such as the United Kingdom or indeed France, that does not mean that we can be in any way complacent. And while we haven't had attacks in this jurisdiction, our people, our citizens, have been directly involved and have suffered as a result of it. And only on the 26th of June last year, we had 3 of our citizens murdered in Sousse in Tunisia while on holidays by ISIL. We've also had a person in the Bataclan who was injured, an Irish person in the Bataclan. So for people who are travelling, for people who do business abroad, for people who go on holidays abroad or live abroad, obviously Irish citizens, and we have to be, they're the messages really, and that is why we have to take these issues very seriously. The settings of our threat level at moderate is based on a measured and an informed assessment of what threat we perceive to exist. While it's obviously inappropriate to comment in detail on all of the factors, especially the operational matters which inform the threat assessment, the following, along with the general developments internationally, are among our considerations when coming to the decision. The potential threat that is posed by returning fighters from conflict zones, the potential for self-motivated lone actors to carry out attacks, and the possibility of unforeseen or unanticipated trigger events which might influence individuals or groups to carry out isolated attacks. Unfortunately, when we are talking about this, we're no longer talking about Ireland being a country that nobody would attack or think about attacking. The reality is that an attack is possible, and we cannot say for definite that it's not going to happen. And that is, I think, that's a sobering enough thought to take away. In dealing with the main challenges posed by terrorism, the role of information and intelligence is critical. The collecting, the processing and the actioning of relevant information and intelligence plays a key role in assessing the threat, in making informed decisions and in dealing with terrorism in all its manifestations. When I refer to intelligence, I am referring to it in its broadest sense, and most especially the potential to translate information into meaningful action, both operationally and strategically. From a policing and security perspective, this is obviously important in addressing the day-to-day operational challenges and identifying threats, but it is also a key influencer in allocating resources, identifying priorities, etc. All factors which may potentially influence the threat picture are kept under constant review, and our liaison relationships with external security and policing agencies play a key role in identifying threats and developing international and local efforts to counter terrorism generally. While intelligence and policing and security responses play a key role in combating the threat, I must emphasise that this is not just a policing or a security issue. Integration right across government is required when working with minority communities at all levels and involves multi-departmental and multi-agency approaches in order to avoid creating ghettos and polarising communities. I want to make special mention of the Garda Síochána's continuing priority in seeking to promote engagement with communities to counter the threat of radicalisation. Garda Síochána operates the Ethnic Liaison Officer Network, which strives to reinforce positive relationships with the Irish Muslim community. Garda Síochána has for many years now established a network working with all minority communities. In the context of Islamic extremism and terrorism, there is much discussion about radicalisation. Radicalisation is a complex, it's a multifaceted phenomenon which involves a wide variety of factors. It can occur face-to-face, but increasingly there is debate about the extent to which online activity is playing a role. One of the key challenges is to better understand how volatile individuals are motivated by terrorist propaganda. In that regard, the Garda Síochána has engaged with a number of leading academics in this area with a view to better understanding the phenomenon of radicalisation and shaping our responses. In that regard, I was absolutely delighted to hear Paul Gill, because he could very well be our next victim to come in and have a chat with us when he's at home in Wicklow someday. But seriously, it is, I suppose, these are threats that we face. They're complex, they're ever-changing, and I think the more research, the more input that we can get that our police working at the desks and indeed working on the streets can get from the likes of Paul and his fellow academics is very, very important. And in that regard, Ireland, I think we have some of the best academic researchers in the world, there's no doubt about it. Looking at key challenges for the future, I'm looking at closer. It is absolutely vital that we have closer cooperation with European police and intelligence services. The existing high level of bilateral and multilateral cooperation with our international partners, particularly those in Europe, will have to be intensified because of the transnational nature of the threat from terrorism. In this regard, we are very much cognizant of the need to ensure that we continue to play our part in exchanging information and experiences. It's very likely that we will see further developments at a European level on areas which would assist EU member states in respect of sharing information and other areas of cooperation relative to counter-terrorism. I think we all recognise that these are complex issues. There are complex issues around data protection, around border management, around passenger name records and the way in which information is collected, these are currently all being discussed at a European level, and I look forward to positive outcomes in relation to all of those. We continue to enjoy a very close cooperation with Europol, as I've already said, and indeed Interpol. We have Garda officers seconded to both. We also have Garda liaison officers attached to a number of Irish embassies throughout Europe. We have excellent interaction with all security services throughout Europe, and our ongoing cooperation and intelligence sharing with them is a key element of countering any threats. There are various dimensions and many new challenges involved in tackling the threat posed by international terrorism. A number of parallels exist to the methodologies which Garda Síochána has successfully employed over the years in dealing with the threat from domestic terrorism. The fundamentals of dealing with any threat is first to gain an understanding of it. This is achieved through intelligence gathering and cooperation with domestic and international partners, and as I have just stated, obviously outreach programmes with academia and people who have done research into what makes these terrorists tick. All these efforts of a better understanding of the threat must be matched with a real and meaningful outreach and engagement with the Muslim community right across the board. Having developed an understanding of the assessment of the threat, it is important that we have appropriate mitigation and preventative actions in place. This involves protective security measures being implemented in areas or in respective individuals where special considerations apply. Allied to the preventative actions, measures must also be taken to ensure that our intervention and our investigative specialist units are trained and equipped to the highest international standards. An Garda Síochána has conducted a number of training and contingency exercises involving internal stakeholders, including our emergency response units, our special detective unit, and indeed with the Defence Forces. We've also carried out these training exercises with our European police and security agency partners. In fact, earlier today in Templemore, one such exercise took place. And these are ongoing, and indeed they are, I suppose, they're in a lessons learned sort of way. Every attack that takes place, including Nice last week, obviously, there are lessons learned from those, and we try to identify as to how we can mitigate as best we can, because, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't think there's any police force or intelligence agency in the world who could prevent, who could tell you that they can prevent such as Nice. But certainly we can do our best to mitigate against that risk. I am satisfied that the Garda Síochána is adequately resourced to face the challenges presented by the specific issue of Islamist terrorism. Specifically, I am talking about not alone just our relevant specialist units such as SDU, the Emergency Response Unit, Security Intelligence, but indeed every guard throughout the country. And every guard throughout the country, whether it be a community guard or whether it be a traffic police officer, they all have a role to play in the security of our country. And that is very much an integrated approach that we have to this issue. Other challenges that will present themselves for the future are the areas of cyber, technological advances, encryption, targeting of assets, migration, border control and Brexit. And just on Brexit, I think it's important to say that I think no matter what happens for the future, cooperation between An Garda Síochána and the police services in the UK and indeed and the security services will continue. It was there before Europe and will be there after Europe. It's going to be more difficult, however. I suppose that's the issue, because a lot of what has happened with Europe is it's streamlined what we do, very much so in the area of European arrest warrants and very much so in the area of, I suppose, the exchange of information through databases, which are centrally based, a lot of them in Europol, and that. So I think they're issues for the future, but these issues certainly can be overcome, and I have no doubt about that. To keep Ireland and its partners safe from any threat, An Garda Síochána has recently published Modernisation and Renewal Programme 2016 to 2021 has identified a number of key programme initiatives, including intelligence sharing, improved connectivity with European databases, external collaboration and enhanced border policing and advanced analytics. These initiatives are designed to ensure that An Garda Síochána will be positioned to play our part in not alone ensuring the security of our country, but also the security of other European and world partners. I think the greatest challenge that we have, and I think it's something that I couldn't actually, but this is something that we've been trying to do in our outreach programme with the communities and from a community policing, is that we have to build trust. The trust of those communities. A lot of these people come from countries that have absolutely no trust, and with a very good reason, from policing and from security services. This is something that we have been trying to do, and as community-based, that we have the trust of those people. And I was very much taken by Fergal Keane in his article last Sunday in the Sunday Independent, and he put it better than I could certainly put it, in that he said that the greatest challenge to policing, and he talked about French policing, but it's policing right across the board, and security services, is securing the trust of those who can supply them with information, not information after the fact, when everybody is upset and willing to talk, but before dangerous men like Mohammed Boulel ever get a chance to act. It's not a guarantee against violence, but the dividends of trust can be enormous. Now, I'm just conscious of time, and I think I've gone through a lot of, but I'll just see if there's anything else important that I just want to talk about here. All of this is in the document anyway I've sent to you, Joe, but I'm just very, very conscious of the time at this stage. Look, I just want to look forward to the various contributions and the panel discussions during the conference, which I hope will illustrate the challenges we face and identify potential coping strategies. And I want to thank you for your attention. Okay.